Shadow Hack. Chapter 371, Luo Honghua's Malice. Host's flux energy strength has reached 76 units. The system replied at an unusually fast speed because it had been carefully analyzing the circumstances of Li Yoon-mu's body the whole time. If even the slightest thing happened to go wrong, the system would immediately raise the alarm. It is already at 76 points. Li Yoon-mu exclaimed. He suddenly felt that after practicing meridian nurturing flux point technique in the past few days, his strength had increased rapidly. In fact, using the words rapid increase wasn't sufficient to describe his situation. He clearly remembered the affair of the master of the 13th room challenging the master of 10th room He Mianshen when he had just entered Blue Moon sect. At that time, He Mianshen's flux energy strength has been 89. His physical strength had reached 23 oxen, while Li Yoon-mu's flux energy strength was only 53 and his physical strength was only 18 oxen. However, just after 6 days, Li Yoon-mu's strength had become on par with the masters of the top 10 rooms, given that his present flux energy strength was 76 points and his physical strength had reached 29 oxen. Just in terms of physical power, he could already battle with He Mianshen of that time. If he also used his absolute defense along with other high-level battle skills, then Li Yoon-mu could easily make the other eat a loss. Although He Mianshen's strength would have also increased by another notch in the past few months, there was no doubt that Li Yoon-mu could fight on par against him. However, one point to be noted was that this was without combining the strength of all the shadows. If Li Yoon-mu battled together with the 10 shadows, he was confident in winning against the masters of first 3 rooms. But as he gained more and more understanding toward the mysteries of the origin world and realized that there were simply too many unknown terrors in it, he became increasingly more cautious while taking each step. If he wasn't fighting in a critical situation or in a region without people, he would definitely not use the power of the 10 shadows. He also didn't dare to casually reveal the punch which included the combined power of 10 shadows. Once it was seen, then God only knew how many troubles he would have to face in the future. The system and shadows were the basis of his confidence in establishing himself in the origin world. That's why they were also his greatest secret that couldn't be revealed under any circumstances. After all, the origin world wasn't like Earth, which had different dimensions with strict restrictions for a person's strength. If he caught the eyes of a great flux master, then with his life-saving treasure, he would still have the ability to flee. But if he provoked a sage flux expert, then he would only be able to walk to his death. It had to be known that the strength of sage flux experts, even those who had just entered the sage layer, wouldn't lose out to the quasi-deities and battle sages, as estimated by the system. That's why, regardless of how many life-saving tricks Li Yoon-mu possessed, he didn't have any certainty to be able to run away in front of such disparity in strength. On Earth, Battle God who possessed 4 parts of a supreme battlesuit was considered an unrivaled existence. But if he came to the origin world, he may not remain undefeated even in front of late-stage sage flux experts. This was the disparity between the origin world and other planes. That's why before Li Yoon-mu had increased his strength greatly, he didn't dare to become a known figure. In the origin world's world calendar's new age, 7636th year, 8th month's, 3rd day was the day which marked a year since the descenders from other planes had started coming over. On that day, Zhengchuan finally decided to make his move. After paying a great price and meticulously trying to form relations, he had been able to form his own small faction in the 15th residential area with himself as leader. His small faction had already attracted a few people which belonged to the 30 experts in the area. On top of that, there were many people from the first 100 rooms in their group. Altogether, they had 14 members. Although they couldn't be considered as very powerful in the 15th residential area, their strength couldn't be looked down upon. It was then the day when Zhengchuan had decided to make his move after scheming for a long time. They had chosen an isolated place to carry out the sect's mission. Naturally, it was just a cover. Their true aim was actually an underground cave on that isolated island. According to Li Yoon-mu's guess, there was something hidden in that cave about which Zhengchuan had received some clues before descending. Just as Battle Sage Vega had asked Li Yoon-mu to go to Blue Moon Island, every other descender had their own secret. Elder brother Chuan, I went to take a look just now. That Li Yoon-mu still hasn't removed the board of seclusion. I think he is going to miss our appointment. Luo Honghua didn't feel any goodwill toward Li Yoon-mu. As for the reason behind it, that was because he had become close to Wang Yan. This sort of sentiment between a descender and a native looked extremely dangerous. Especially given that it was initiated by the woman. But this was only the surface reason for her displeasure. The true reason, which Zhengchuan also knew, was that a certain incident had happened to Luo Honghua before which had caused a shadow over her heart. That's why the stubborn woman wasn't too fond of males. She hated that her Wang Yan had been stolen by Li Yoon-mu. Let's wait for a little more. I believe that Li Yoon-mu isn't someone who would go back on his words. Zhengchuan had become quite mature after being groomed for the past few months. The way he treated people had also changed. He didn't look down on them as when he had just descended. Presently, he had to act as the leader of a small faction. His actions had gained him the image of a liberal scholar in the residential region, and he also treated people quite cordially, which had allowed him to create his own faction. In the 15th residential region, he had gradually displayed his talent and gained some small fame, which had attracted many newcomers who had just entered Blue Moon sect together with somewhat powerful older disciples. All of this allowed his faction to rise abruptly in status. Origin World was indeed a region where one could sharpen themselves, especially the proud sons of heavens who had descended from other planes. They had been outstanding in their planes, but lacked harsh environment and ability to assume responsibility. But when faced with the enormous pressure of the Origin World, they could only grow or let themselves be trampled. Zhengchuan had improved, just like Li Yoon-mu, in the dangerous environment. He had become even more sly and cautious, completely different from the time when he used to show his arrogance. The difference between them, though, was that Li Yoon-mu had chosen to improve his own strength and carefully conceal himself until he was strong enough to fear no one. Chapter 372, Movement. What concerned Zhengchuan, he was the cornerstone of his faction, so he had no choice other than to go attracting people to strengthen it. Clearly, he attached great importance to what he had created. He also valued the friendships and connections formed in the 15th residential area because he had decided to use this area as the foundation of his abrupt rise in establishing himself in the Origin World. But Luo Honghua was different. Although Zhengchuan was quite concerned about the beautiful Wang Yan being interested in a native of the Origin World, but he could accept that. Compared to the broader picture and his future, what was a woman? Even if Wang Yan had extremely high status in their plane, being one of the 7 princesses, he could still let it go. Because in his eyes, the native with the name Li Yoon-mu was pretty strong. This young man had kept a low profile and efficiently occupied the 50th room, holding onto it with stability. In the 15th residential area, there were rumors that Li Yoon-mu's strength was sufficient to occupy one of the first 30 rooms. But in Zhengchuan's eyes, not only did he possess the strength to occupy one of the front 30 rooms, he had the potential to reach the top 10. However, he only had the potential, not the strength. Zhengchuan believed that as long as Li Yoon-mu was provided with enough resources and time to cultivate, then when he established his foundation, he would possess the strength to challenge the masters of the front 10 rooms. Therefore, Zhengchuan had decided long ago that he had to carefully pull this rather promising native to his side. Besides, he was quite certain it would work out because of all of them coming from the same place. Because of those thoughts, he could tolerate and even instigate contact between Wang Yan and Li Yoon-mu to pull him into his faction. When speaking of coming from the same origins, the person which Zhengchuan wanted to pull into his faction the most was Pan Shan. This person from a fisherman village of Azure Dragon Isle had extraordinary constitution. Before even becoming a physical flux expert, he already possessed the strength of 32 oxen. If Zhengchuan was able to rope him in, he would have gotten himself a valiant general in the future. But unfortunately, not only did he have extraordinary constitution, but also possessed a keen intuition. He could sense that Zhengchuan wasn't an honest person, and on top of that was slowly pulled away by Suolei. By then, Zhengchuan had almost given up on them. Humph, this Li Yoon-mu is really arrogant. He always makes our Wang Yan go and call him, but until now he hasn't even showed his shadow. Although Luo Honghua was stubborn, she clearly understood Zhengchuan's thought process. Strength was the final decision-making factor in every case. Zhengchuan possessed higher strength and more tricks than her, so she didn't dare to be too excessive. However, her thoughts were still focused on pulling Wang Yan away from Li Yoon-mu. Hearing her words, 2 of the 14 people knitted their brows. "Where has Sister Yan gone?" one of the Flux experts asked with anger on his face. "Where else could she have gone? She once more went to that Li Yoon-mu's room at dawn." Luo Honghua continued with her schemes and added oil to the fire. Pang! The inquiring Flux expert couldn't help but stamp heavily on the tile below his feet, which crushed it to pieces. Someone occupying only the 50th room. Outrageous! But he didn't continue to show his anger. Although he was one of the few people who owned a room in the front 30, he didn't want to create internal strife in the faction at such a critical juncture. He knew that today's mission was very important for Zhengchuan. As if called by her name, Wang Yan returned at that moment. She was wearing a light yellow long skirt. When she came, as gentle and beautiful as ever, the eyes of the majority of males all lit up. It was hard to find a noble who would accept close relations with barbarians. But this beautiful noble had such a benevolent temperament that she accepted all barbarians as friends. Thus, the majority of Flux experts and physical Flux experts roped by Zhengchuan were extremely attracted towards Wang Yan. As for Luo Honghua, although she was also a noble, her temperament and boorish appearance wasn't to anyone's taste. "I am sorry to keep everyone waiting. Elder brother Yoon-mu remains in seclusion, having gotten stuck due to some urgent matter. He asked us to go first and not wait for him. He will meet us on the aisle," Wang Yan said in an apologetic tone. But her genuine apology and defense of Li Yoon-mu caused many people in the faction to become jealous. "Since he isn't coming, we should leave first." Acting as the leader, Zhengchuan had remained a spectator throughout the conversations. Thus, he was the most clear about the general situation and immediately issued the order to set off, seeing that his small faction might get embroiled in an internal strife if they delayed. Before setting off, he gave a warning glance to Luo Honghua. "Damn it, women are the most unreasonable creatures." In his heart, Zhengchuan was already getting fed up with Luo Honghua's tactics. Just because she couldn't control her desires, that damned woman had surprisingly tried to break his rule by inciting the people of their faction against Li Yoon-mu. This made Zhengchuan extremely angry. He began to dislike her even more than Wang Yan, who couldn't control her attraction towards Li Yoon-mu. After all, she was someone who wasn't under his control and did not follow his orders. It had to be dealt with, even if she was a descender. Seeing the vague warning glance from Zhengchuan, Luo Honghua shuddered. For some reason, she had become increasingly more terrified of her somewhat frightening descender companion. After descending, he had changed and become even more frightening, regardless if it was in terms of strength or temperament. Soon, with Zhengchuan as the lead, their group, which comprised of 23 people, started their journey. They appeared to be a group of ordinary disciples starting their journey to complete a mission for the sect. Apart from the 15 core members, there were 8 new members who were being tested. Zhengchuan was cultivating those 8 newcomers as reserve strength. The reason why they had been allowed on the journey this time was actually to act as guard and carry out the miscellaneous tasks. It was clear that even before descending, Zhengchuan and his group had a powerful background who had prepared many trump cards and wealth for them. Although Zhengchuan wasn't as wealthy as Li Yoon-mu, he could still be considered quite wealthy among the impoverished newcomers of Blue Moon Island, once he sold some of his treasures and resources. A large boat which was more than 3 meters long was waiting at the internal port of Blue Moon Island. Once their party stepped on it, it quickly rushed into the distance. Cloud Island was another one of the smaller islands in the vicinity of Blue Moon Sect. It wasn't the group's final destination, but the isle closest to their goal, the uninhibited primitive island. Zhengchuan's plan was to first make thorough preparations and accumulate supplies, while Wang Yan only thought about Li Yoon-mu timely reaching their meeting point so she could see him again. Chapter 373, The Increase in Ape God's Strength. At that moment, Li Yoon-mu wasn't at Blue Moon Island, but in Mid-Sea region which was 10 kilometers to the west. Before departing, he had some matters to which he needed to attend. Given that he hadn't come to check on the refining pagoda for a long time, there was a lot of blood essence from vicious beasts which had accumulated within it. Li Yoon-mu collected all of it in a jade bottle and immersed them in the spring water in his heavenly world, thus ensuring that the blood essence wouldn't decay for the time being. Apart from that, Li Yoon-mu had another objective, and it was to ask for the reports of external crises from the patrolling ape gods. The leader of the patrol squad was known as Mountain Ape. It was the name given to it by Li Yoon-mu for its clever and wise actions. In truth, he had named all the leaders of the hunting squad, rescue squad, and patrolling squad as B.A. Ape, Virtuous Ape, and Mountain Ape respectively. You are saying that around 10 days ago, there were people from outside who had snuck in to investigate our Mid-Sea region. Ho ho! Mountain Ape promptly nodded with a low howl. Although Li Yoon-mu couldn't clearly understand what the howls meant, it was ape gods' language. Since with the soul imprints the ape gods had been bound to his heavenly world, he could understand the fluctuations in their mood according to their howls and roughly understand the idea they wanted to convey. Mountain Ape occasionally used low-pitched howls, and sometimes used too high-pitched howls, and then sometimes anger would appear on its face. Before long, the leader of the hunting squad, B.A. Ape, also joined in. An ominous glint flitted across the eyes of B.A. Ape. It meant that if not for Master's command to not make any large movements so that they could gain a lot of wealth without anyone learning of it, B.A. Ape would have already led the ape gods to kill those damned greedy humans. Virtuous Ape was the leader of the rescue squad, and his character was as his name suggested. He was extremely kind, one the few among the ape gods who were famous for their savageness. But its kindness wasn't for outsiders, but fellow companions. That's why, strictly speaking, it wasn't that kind-hearted to strangers. Rather, it was even more cruel and scheming than B.A. Ape. Apart from not knowing how to speak the human language, the wisdom and intellect of ape gods wasn't much inferior to that of humans after they awakened their ancestral bloodlines with the help of divine blood. But Li Yoon-mu stopped the three from making any movements. We will continue with the initial precautions and make sure no actions are taken in vain. Mountain Ape, starting from now, your patrolling squad must be more vigilant of the surroundings. We cannot allow them to come here and discover the secret of refining pagoda. Alright then, we won't deal with the outsiders spying on us for the time being. This place is too close to Blue Moon Island, so wait for me to return and then we will look for another suitable place. Li Yoon-mu stopped the three apes from dealing with the outsiders. In fact, Li Yoon-mu had already prepared himself mentally that this region couldn't conceal their secret for a long time. With the 300 ape gods and shadows going on a killing spree every day for a few months, it was foreordained that this region's ecological equilibrium would be disrupted. Thus, the Flux experts of Blue Moon Sect coming here to investigate it was perfectly normal. Since the other party only peeped on them from the distance, not daring to show themselves, it meant that they weren't very formidable. They didn't have the confidence to confront the couple hundred of ape gods. According to Li Yoon-mu's guess, the reason why those people had checked here was probably because they were curious about the sudden appearance of the ape gods. Thus, it wasn't yet the time to make a move. Li Yoon-mu just decided that after he returned, he would change their hunting ground as soon as possible. After all, when all was said and done, this place was too close to Blue Moon Island. Even if the group of tiger fishes obstructed people from coming over, it wouldn't continue for a long time. Leading the three ape gods, Yoon-mu entered the refining pagoda's ground level. After getting out of the sea water, he began to closely inspect the situation of Ba ape, virtuous ape, and mountain ape. Not bad, you have greatly progressed recently. The system quickly scanned the three ape gods and then transferred the final data to Yoon-mu. The increase in the physical strength of these three apes was unusually fast. Although it hadn't increased at the rocket speed like that of Yoon-mu, their development was still far superior to that of normal humans. Within a brief period of 2-3 months, the physical strength of the three ape gods had already been upgraded to 19 oxen from 12. Ba ape, who had superior talent compared to others, had already reached 23 oxen. When the system sent the data back to Yoon-mu, he was extremely astonished, but the system's full analysis allowed him to understand how that happened. First reason behind the great increase in strength was that the ape gods were considered as talented dimensional beasts in the fifth dimension. Therefore, after they arrived in the original world and ate extreme grade power grain, their talent in physical strength began to display itself. Thus, eating 3 grains of extreme grade power grain every day was behind the quick increase in their strength. The second reason was that the ape gods had been staying at mid-sea region, which was 3,000 meters below the surface, for the last couple months and were constantly enduring the enormous pressure. Confronting this powerful pressure for a long time had increased the quality of their body and caused it to undergo an evolution. The period of a couple months was short and their evolution was quite minor, but given that their environment had changed, it was sufficient to make their physical bodies even more tyrannical. It could be seen as a necessary adaptation of a species toward environment change, which was a natural law. According to the system, the more potential a species was, the more difficult it was to predict their future development. The third reason was that his creatures had swallowed divine blood and thus awakened their ancestral bloodline. In addition to that, they had been battling with vicious beasts every day, so their physical strength was bound to increase quickly. Chapter 374, Space Elements Crisis. The 3 reasons behind ape gods' sudden increase in strength in the brief period of 2-3 months. But the system also said that their advancement would soon come to stop. Their bottleneck would be their physical strength reaching 30 oxen. The reason for that was that the strength of 30 oxen touched the limits of their body's innate talent. Apart from this, after their strength reached 30 oxen, the pressure of the sea at 3,000 meters would no longer make them feel any suppression. Because of that, their evolution due to the surroundings would also stop. As for the power grains, after the ape gods ate large amount of them, their bodies would reach a state of saturation and amplification that it would no longer improve anymore. Despite this, Yoon-mu was still quite satisfied. If the 306-limbed ape gods could attain the strength of 30 oxen within half-year, they would no longer be helpless against high-level flux experts. When the time came to fight, given their numbers and unity, flux experts wouldn't pose much of a threat to them, which was the most important thing. After maturing to that stage, not only would the ape gods attain the strength to move independently in the origin world, they would also be able to provide great assistance to Yoon-mu. But that wasn't enough. Yoon-mu didn't want their progress to stop there. When Ba ape and the others saw their master take out 3 cultivation relaying globes, their eyes went wide and began to shine brightly. There was nothing surprising about it. After all, there was no one who would desire anything more compared to cultivation relaying globes. Since the ape gods had cultivated H.A.C.K's secret technique and H.A.C.K 8 steps, they clearly understood the benefits of human cultivation methods. Great Sun's secret technique had allowed them to cultivate the flame energy. Every time they applied their strength, they didn't have to rely on explosive physical power, but could use the burning flame energy, which could be considered as a type of flux energy. Among them, Shan Ape's cultivation of the Great Sun's secret technique was the fastest and most profound. It had already achieved minor threshold where it could launch a fiery fist. H.A.C.K 8 steps was an explosive type footwork technique. When using that technique, the user's steps would become swifter and fiercer. It then greatly transformed Ape God's original explosive power, which relied on instinct rather than any technique. Xiaotian 8 steps allowed the ape gods who possessed intellect and explosive speed to no longer charge forward clumsily like before, but use skill for that. And the best at it was Mountain Ape. This was the reason why Yoon-mu had made him the leader of the patrol squad. While most of the ape gods had only cultivated to 3 or 4 steps, Mountain Ape had far surpassed his fellow companions and reached the 6th step. The fierce and explosive agility which he possessed was something which his fellow companions who had cultivated to only 3 or 4 steps found could only dream about. Thus, when Yoon-mu brought out an even more powerful cultivation method, the 3 ape gods naturally looked at the 3 cultivation relaying globe with great longing. This is a limit training body refining technique which mainly focuses on defense. By cultivating this technique, you will be able to display the power of your physical body to the pinnacle. When the time comes, even when not using the Iron Pistol Wood's aqua armor, you won't have to worry about being torn apart by tiger fishes based on your physical defense alone. When Yoon-mu introduced cross-cover armor, the 3 ape gods found it extremely difficult to control themselves. They were full of excitement. For them, that technique was even more suitable than Yoon-mu since it was a cultivation method for purely the physical body, which they relied on the most. The cultivation relaying globes became the most precious treasure for them. It was clear that cross-cover armor which strengthened personal defense was the most precious cultivation method for ape gods. When joined with their half-undying body, it would increase their combat capability by a few levels. Since Yoon-mu understood it, how couldn't the ape gods understand it? Ho ho! Ba-ape hurriedly took the cultivation relaying globe, looking anxious about starting to cultivate it right away. It was howling as if blaming Yoon-mu for not giving it to all the ape gods when it was such a suitable cultivation method for them. If all the ape gods could cultivate it, then their race's strength would certainly increase. Yoon-mu guessed the meaning of Ba-ape's gaze, but slowly shook his head. It isn't as simple as you think. The most important thing is that manufacturing cultivation relaying globe requires space elements which I haven't yet found in this origin world, and my current reserves are getting depleted quickly. In fact, Yoon-mu was quite distressed. Although he was able to find a substitute for flux energy crystals, flux binding pills, he hadn't been able to discover any replacements for space elements. Because of that, he was forced to live on the previously accumulated amount for the past year. Because of that, the amount of space elements he had was less than 5 digits. Using one space element meant one less was left. The 3 ape gods felt sad upon hearing it, and Ba-ape even patted its chest and howled as if saying that once they became more powerful, they would help Yoon-mu search for more space elements. Hearing this, Yoon-mu could only smile. He naturally wouldn't reveal his ape gods to the origin world before they had matured to becoming formidable. After all, they were one of his greatest trump cards. He had to wait until they possessed sufficient strength, only then could he reveal them in public. All right, now you 3 must strive hard to cultivate. As for the matter of leading the squads, hand over these responsibilities to your assistants. You 3 must focus on cultivating and becoming more powerful first, only then will I feel like it's okay to leave the ape gods under your command. Otherwise, it will be quite troublesome for me. After some pondering, Yoon-mu took out another 10 cultivation relaying globe of cross-cover armor. It was the largest amount he could produce. After he created them, his space elements dropped to pitiful 3 digits. Furthermore, given that he had obtained the Profound Dragon Cultivation, Profound Dragon Strength and Profound Dragon Steps, all of whom had no conditions and could be transferred to ape gods, Yoon-mu felt quite regretful. But that regret didn't last for long since the origins of the Profound Dragon series was quite mysterious, and Yoon-mu didn't plan to reveal them to the world before obtaining definite information about their origins, lest he invite a disaster onto himself. The 10 cultivation relaying globes was his limit. He gave them to Ba-ape, Mountain Ape and Shan Ape so that they could choose the candidates who would cultivate them. After all, they were the ones who spent their days with the other ape gods and so naturally knew who was more suitable and had higher innate talent. Chapter 375, Devil Sea Beast's Conscpicious body. Good, now you 13 must focus on cultivating this method and becoming more formidable. Only when you have sufficient strength will you be able to ensure your race's survival. So cultivate properly. After patting the head of Ba Ape, Li Yoon-mu didn't stay there for much longer. As for the people who were spying on them recently, Li Yoon-mu thought about it and decided not to bring Li Yun and the other with him. The 10 shadows were tantamount to 10 Li Yunmas guarding the god apes. This would ensure that until he returned from his trip, the secret of refining pagoda wouldn't be leaked out. As for when he would need the combat strength of the 10 shadows, one thought would be enough to recall them back to his side. It would only take a few seconds. Li Yoon-mu collected 680 kilograms of blood essence refined from Vicious Beast. The harvest was thus clearly much higher than the first time. He had also been pleasantly surprised the strength of ape gods increasing greatly. After climbing to the western coast of Blue Moon Island, Li Yoon-mu took out the skull of the fire god's Mount Karl-Werther. It was carved from wood and used to identify the members of Hall clan like the inscribed badges used by humans. The wooden carving that Li Yoon-mu had was slightly different from the one which normal Hall clansmen possessed. It was used to signify that he was a foreigner friend. It was a sort of reward, like a prize for being an exception. But if someone thought that the wooden carving didn't have any other use than that, they would be gravely mistaken. There were actually 3 of them in total. First, he could freely enter and exit the Hall clans present in various regions of the origin world without being attacked. He could even ask for shelter of the Hall clan. That wasn't just a flashy use, but a great reward. It was similar to political asylums on Earth before the Dark Ages. If he ever faced desperate straits when he would be at the end of his rope, that political asylum could be used to save his life. The second use was intimidating monsters. It was said that a hint of Karl-Werther's presence existed in the wooden carving. Thus, the majority of enormous beast grade would be intimidated. Naturally, this intimidation wasn't absolute. After all, the monsters were similar to humans. There were some people who weren't afraid of anything, so regardless of what one used to intimidate them, they wouldn't be scared. And some beasts were also like that. But even being able to intimidate the majority of beasts was a great ability. The third use was the one which Li Yoon-mu needed to use immediately. It let one use the carved skull to summon the members of the 8 races which had once been subservient to Karl-Werther and have the right to request their assistance. Li Yoon-mu found a region which was completely isolated and facing the ocean before lightly blowing inside the mouth of Karl-Werther's skull. That's right, the carved skull was actually a whistle. The mouth of the whistle was the skull's mouth. As soon as Li Yoon-mu blew on it, formless energy fluctuations spread out into the distance without any actual sound. Of the 8 races which used to be subservient to Karl-Werther, 3 resided in the ocean. Regarding the mystical summon which was like a myth, Li Yoon-mu was both vigilant and curious. Before blowing the whistle again, he waited for 10 minutes. If after doing so 3 times at this tempo no beast was called out, it meant that there were no monsters from the 8 races in a 100-kilometer radius. Using that unique rhythm, Li Yoon-mu blew the whistle twice, but there was still no movement or change. Yet when he was about to blow the 3rd time, a towering wave rushed forth in his direction from several nautical miles away. It has come. I only hope that its temperament is good. At the sight, Li Yoon-mu shivered while waiting for the summoned being to appear. Before long, the several nautical miles distance was covered in less than 10 seconds. An enormous monster came close to the coast and slowly revealed its figure. As the beast emerged from the sea surface, Li Yoon-mu felt an enormous shadow envelope him. The summoned being was surprisingly a desolate beast. Since coming to the origin world, Li Yoon-mu had never encountered one. Oh? It's surprisingly a human? Whatever, our 8 races have always relied on the token and not on the person. Speaking of which, since you are human, we won't be able to assist you in battle, but other than that, feel free to ask for assistance. The enormous creature's voice jolted Li Yoon-mu's consciousness. The beast had only revealed a portion of its body, but it was already several hundred meters high. Under the surface, its length would probably surpass 2 or even 3,000 kilometers. At that instant, Li Yoon-mu understood the real terror of the Hall clan. It was a primitive clan which had been sheltered by a deity in the ancient times. Unless they faced a mortal danger, no one would ever guess what sort of terrifying trump cards they hid. And Li Yoon-mu had learned about one of their trump cards. According to the origin world's understanding toward desolate beasts, what Li Yoon-mu was facing should be a sea breeze whale. But he had learned that all beasts who crossed the size of 1,000 meters were considered as desolate beasts. And the sea breeze whale before him was nearly 3 kilometers long. From that, it was clear that even among the desolate beasts, it held a terrifying position. Li Yoon-mu fell in a daze. He had never anticipated that on his first time blowing the whistle, such a frightening creature would appear. Desolate beasts, what did they signify in the origin world? And what sort of existences were they? At that moment, Li Yoon-mu recalled that sea breeze whales were actually an extremely terrifying existence whose name caused the residents of the islands to turn pale with fear. The desolate beasts living in deep ocean had another name. They were called devil sea beasts. The region they inhabited wasn't the mid or deep sea region, but deep ocean, which was over 30,000 meters below sea level. In the opinion of ordinary people, one wouldn't see such a beast in their lifetime. And if one was sighted at the shores, a catastrophe would certainly follow. Chapter 376, Half Request. Devil sea beasts usually couldn't be seen on the surface of the ocean. But if they did rise, it was certainly to take revenge. And Li Yoon-mu, who had just wanted to summon a being to assist him in reaching Cloud Island, had surprisingly summoned a calamity-class existence, a devil sea beast. He was left dumbstruck, wondering what would happen if he mentioned his request. Maybe the other party would send a water stream at him to turn him into a mass of flesh. Speak, human. My time is very precious. We, sea breeze whales, are a devil sea beast clan which puts most emphasis on trustworthiness. As long as I can accomplish it, I will aid you. The incomparably enormous devil sea beast moved its tail heavily in the ocean, causing large fluctuations in the water. Its words did not match with its actions. What emphasis on trustworthiness, what acceptings all his requests. Li Yoon-mu wasn't a greenhorn who had just started cultivating. If he believed the exaggerations of the other party, he would be a true idiot. But given the noisy actions of the sea breeze whale, Li Yoon-mu hardened his resolve and said with a bitter smile, "Sire, from the Grand Sea Breeze Whale clan, I only wanted to quickly reach Cloud Island, not considering that my actions might disturb sire." By the time Li Yoon-mu finished speaking, his entire body had stretched taut. He was prepared to make a run for it at a moment's notice, even if he didn't know whether he would be able to escape from the desolate class monster standing in front of him. But he had already planned for the worst case. Regardless of what happened, he couldn't just sit idly waiting for his death. It was said that all monsters which had stepped into the desolate beast level had one thing in common: they all had cruel temperaments, which came from their large bodies. Naturally, among monsters, the larger one's body, the more powerful monster were they. There was no doubt that the sea breeze whale in front of Li Yoon-mu wasn't only equivalent to a sage flux expert, since it was far larger than a standard desolate beast. It was highly possible that it was equivalent to the battle sage flux experts of the origin world. Such a terrifying devil sea beast would find it easy to deal with battle god from war god temple if he descended from earth, let alone someone like Li Yoon-mu. Sure enough, sea breeze whale's actions weren't similar to its kind words. When it heard Li Yoon-mu's request, it was startled for a long time. Once he grasped that he really just asked that, it was unable to control its mental state and began to roll around in the ocean to discharge its anger. In a short while, just when Li Yoon-mu was about to make his exit, the enormous creature managed to control itself. "All right, if that's what you wish, then as I said previously, my sea breeze whale clan is considered as the honorable one among the 8 clans. Come quickly, I will take you to that isolate isle at an extremely fast speed." That faint message was transferred into Li Yoon-mu's mind in a voice which seemed to be suppressing extreme anger. It shook Li Yoon-mu's consciousness like an 8th-grade earthquake. He didn't dare to move and cautiously asked to confirm, "Really? Human, you mustn't suspect the reputation of my Sea Breeze Whale clan. This joke isn't the least bit funny." "All right." After the confirmation, Li Yoon-mu realized that the other party had no intention to tear him apart. The commotion created by the Sea Breeze Whale had attracted the attention of some formidable humans in the distance. Noticing that, Li Yoon-mu, who didn't want to take any chances, ran into the ocean and climbed onto the enormous whale with great effort. "Get lost!" Just when Li Yoon-mu stepped on the back, a shrill, explosive sound reached his ears. He was so scared that he almost jumped back, but from the corner of his eyes, he saw the Sea Breeze Whale open its enormous mouth and shoot a jet of water. Bang! A powerful explosion resounded far away. At that moment, the human figures which had been quickly closing in from the direction of the central region of Blue Moon Island were blown away. After the jet of water scattered, Li Yoon-mu, who couldn't see the identity of the people approaching, could make out that the black figures at a distance were pushed away even farther. He was completely shaken in his heart. Desolate Beast, a catastrophe-level monster of the origin world, was truly fearless. Perhaps only genuine deities would be able to control a sea breeze whale of such size. At that moment, Li Yoon-mu was certain that there would be an upheaval in Blue Moon sect. A devil sea beast suddenly appearing on the western coast of Blue Moon Island was enough to scare the entire upper echelon of Blue Moon sect. The people approaching the shore should have been people from Blue Moon Island coming to investigate the affair. Given their speed, their cultivations probably surpassed those of great Flux experts. However, they were still easily blown away like stray dogs by a jet of water shot casually by the sea breeze whale. No other thing Li Yoon-mu had experienced had allowed him to experience the deep water and scorching fire of the origin world. When a creature possessed that level of strength, it could easily fill a person with determination to reach its height. This was the true meaning of possessing unrivaled strength, which allowed one to break all rules and seek what their heart desired. Under normal circumstances, being willful was considered a bad trait, but if one possessed the capital to back it up, they would face no punishment nor have to pay any reparations. Such realm of power would certainly fascinate everyone. There will certainly be a day when I will reach it. Violent waves were surging in Li Yoon-mu's heart while the surrounding scenery was changing rapidly. By then, he finally understood the reason behind the word breeze in the name of sea breeze whale. It was because this creature moved like the wind over the water, its speed far surpassing Li Yoon-mu's imagination. What cruise, what devil serpent in front of the sea breeze whale, neither of them even had the qualifications to be mentioned in the same sentence. "Human, your request is extremely simple, it will lose face for my sea breeze whale clan. I will give you another chance, make a half request." While the surrounding islands and isles were being left behind quickly, the sea breeze whale's voice echoed in Li Yoon-mu's consciousness. Even if his spirit was refined, it was defenseless in front of a creature of that level. Half request. By then, Li Yoon-mu had already calmed down. He was certain that the sea breeze whale wasn't doing it specifically for him, it was an innate arrogance and dominance possessed by that formidable creature. The agreement signed between the 8 clans and the demon lion Karl Werther were probably also a restriction. Yes, half request. It isn't much, but it's also not too little. When Li Yoon-mu heard it, he genuinely began to call the creature names in his head. What half request? There was nothing specific about it. That sea breeze whale was completely shameless. Perhaps only those requests which it found all right would pass the criteria of half request. Given that, Li Yoon-mu didn't have much hope that the devil sea beast would fulfill any of his wishes. After thinking about it for a moment, Li Yoon-mu was certain that the sea breeze whale was actually a petty and narrow-minded creature. He suddenly thought of something and said, "I want to know the process of creating a flux binding pill. Can you tell it to me?" Chapter 377, Flux Binding Pill's Origin. Li Yoon-mu suddenly thought of something and said, I want to know the process of creating Flux binding pill. Can you tell me? Flux binding pill. The sea-breezing whale said in Li Yoon-mu's mind in an odd tone. Li Yoon-mu touched his scalp and said in a fake disappointed voice, "What? Don't tell me that even as a grand ancient sea breeze clansman, sire also doesn't know about it." As he expected, once the sea breeze whale heard his comment, it said in a high-pitched voice, "Who said I don't know? There are very few things in this world which my sea breeze whale clan doesn't know about." But after those words which delighted Li Yoon-mu, the next one sent his mood into the abyss. The secret in question far surpasses the half request. Therefore, I will not inform you. Human, I ask you to stop with your cheap tricks in front of a being which has lived for thousands of years. Don't test me. The sea breeze whale's voice contained a hint of warning and pride. Then what would be the price for which sire could exchange that secret information? Li Yoon-mu turned gloomy. Although it was a monster, it wasn't that stupid. The sea breeze whale had indeed lived for a long time. According to Earth's ancient words, anyone who has lived for a long time will be extremely experienced. Clearly, this rule also applied to the origin world. In fact, among the 4 classes of monsters, the majority of them had already attained wisdom by the time they stepped into the enormous beast class. And that wisdom was no inferior to that of humans. However, they were still unable to achieve the intellect of desolate beasts who could speak human words and communicate mentally. Ah, this is interesting. First allow me to think. Flux binding pill is the secret of humanity's upper class. Under ordinary circumstances, any human would consider it as a taboo subject. Even if one knew, they shouldn't speak of it nor mention it like you did. Your actions betray that you still don't know about due to your strength being far from sufficient. However, my sea breeze whale clan isn't bound to keep a secret among humans, nor do we fear the powerhouses of humanity. Therefore, as long as you can pay the price which can move my heart, I will tell you about it. It was clear that the sea breeze whale had lived a long time in solitude. Once something caught its interest, it began to speak much more. Li Yoon-mu became secretly excited. There was a chance that he could obtain some of this world humanity's secrets. It had to be known that any matter of the origin world was strictly guarded on the basis of the class system. Regardless of whether it were humans or monsters or any other being, all of them had strict hierarchy. If one inquired about information above their class, they would face extreme punishment and penalty. That's why what was different here was that it wasn't that people didn't know about secrets, but that they wouldn't speak of them. The number of secrets one could learn about in the origin world was completely dependent on one's personal strength and position. And right then, he could obtain the information from the sea breeze whale who didn't fear humans, so why would he waste such an opportunity? This youngster doesn't have anything, however, I still request sire about the conditions, Li Yoon-mu said. Simple, if you don't summon me for a year, then I will tell you about it, the sea breeze whale said after some pondering. This it would make things extremely difficult for me. When Li Yoon-mu heard the demand, he was startled. It wasn't because it would be inconvenient for him, but rather because of the condition itself. Motherfu **Ker, was that still a condition? Not summoning it for 1 year? What sort of condition was that? In fact, the first line the sea breeze whale had said after coming to the surface was that it wouldn't intervene in any battles, and Li Yoon-mu had been dissatisfied with this helper which he had summoned but could not use. Yet the condition wasn't that simple. Although it wasn't a big loss for Li Yoon-mu, he still feigned that he was in a troublesome position. That is extremely difficult. Without you, sire, how will I travel, how will I live throughout this year? Without being able to summon me, you will face great inconvenience and suffer great losses. Then how about this, as long as you don't summon me for a year, I will answer an additional question of yours, the sea breeze whale said. Li Yoon-mu clearly understood the usage of Hall clan's carved skull. It could only be blown once per month to summon one of the 8 races under Karl Werther and obtain assistance from them. In other words, it could be used 12 times per year. Clearly, the sea breeze whale knew that Li Yoon-mu was a disciple of Blue Moon Island, and its old nest just happened to be in the vicinity. Therefore, it was very anxious that whether it was something important or not, Li Yoon-mu would blow the whistle month after month and thus disturb its peaceful life. But Li Yoon-mu didn't want to lose the right to summon the 8 races every month. They were a great assistance to him, so in the end the two of them reached a compromise. They came to an understanding that in the next year, if Li Yoon-mu blew the whistle, the sea breeze whale would have no need to respond to the summoning. And the price that the sea breeze whale would pay for it would be telling Li Yoon-mu about the process to create Flux binding pill in addition to answering another one of his questions. Thus, when all was said and done, both of them were satisfied. Li Yoon-mu only lost the right to summon the sea breeze whale clan for a year while still retaining his right to summon the other 7 clans. Thus the loss for him wasn't that great. The sea breeze whale, in the meantime, could enjoy his life peacefully during that time. Good, now I will tell you the secret of Flux binding pill. You must not spread it, and I will only transmit it to your ears. I vow that I will comply with the terms discussed between us. Li Yoon-mu declared his position and began to concentrate on the matter at hand. Actually, this matter cannot be considered as a big secret among the upper echelons of humanity. What concerns how the flux binding pills are made, they are actually refined flux energy gathered from a matured different space. Very simple, right? As long as you know it, you will understand that it is very simple. Next, the sea breeze whale began to explain about the flux binding pill in detail. The more Li Yoon-mu heard, the more awed he became. He had thought that the origin world was vast, having made a conservative estimate that its area should be 10,000 times greater than that of Earth. And it was a conservative estimate because his understanding of the origin world was too shallow. But after hearing about the details of flux binding pill from the sea breeze whale, he learned about secrets common people had no idea about. At that moment, he realized that the vastness of the origin world was far from what he'd imagined. Chapter 378, also possess one. The mature different spaces mentioned by the sea breeze whale actually pointed at the countless different dimensional planes in every major region of the origin world. They were similar to the 5th dimension, 6th dimension, and 7th dimension on his Earth. They contained all sorts of fantastic oddities which far surpassed anyone's imagination, but it wasn't like Earth where they had only a few stable different planes. As for why the whale insisted on using the word mature, this was the most important point. Only those dimensional spaces which had stabilized over countless years, having not collapsed for several thousand years, could be considered as mature different dimensions. People weren't willing to enter dimensions which hadn't stabilized. Well, besides the few extremely formidable lunatics who didn't care much about their life. Yoon-mu also heard from the sea breeze whale that the immature dimensions surprisingly contained countless ownerless heavenly kingdoms, which were nearly identical to Li Yoon-mu's heavenly world. The most important fact about the heavenly kingdoms was that the ownerless ones were born within the origin world. Some of them had been around for a long time and were gradually getting close to becoming mature. But some of them were newly born, with their age not even crossing 1 year. The only difference between them and Li Yoon-mu's heavenly world was that they didn't have any origin dimensional stone and were born by themselves. That's why before maturing, they tended to be extremely unstable. Li Yoon-mu's heavenly world had been born from the origin dimensional stone, because of which it became stable as soon as it appeared. On top of that, it also had him as the master. In his heavenly world, Li Yoon-mu could control all of its world power, he was like a god in there. But there wasn't any such person for the ownerless heavenly kingdoms. Even if they became mature, they were still an ownerless object. And even if anyone occupied it, it wouldn't mean that they had become the owner. Due to that, the basic factor which decided the ownership of an ownerless heavenly world was the fist. When Li Yoon-mu thought about it, he was completely awed. Not only did the origin world surprisingly have countless different dimensions of all types, it also had ownerless heavenly kingdoms. And where did the flux binding pill come from? It was the refined flux energy gathered from the countless different dimensions using certain secret treasures in combination with mystical techniques. He also learned from the sea breeze whale that the gathered flux energy was almost like a gathered atmosphere. But there were a few conditions which needed to be fulfilled to accomplish that task. First was that one had to possess sufficient strength. Whether it was the personal strength or the organization's strength, it had to be great enough to be acknowledged by others, but not large enough to destroy the different dimension one wished to occupy. When one wanted to refine a flux binding pill, the first and foremost condition was that they had to occupy a dimensional space, and it had to possess paramount flux energy. If the amount wasn't enough, there would emerge a large difference in investment and earnings, thus making the venture not worth the effort. But occupying a dimensional space with plentiful flux energy wasn't easy. The area of the dimensional space containing plentiful flux energy would have naturally existed for a very long time and thus contain many local creatures. This means that one would require a lot of manpower to eradicate them. That's why one would need a large amount of manpower with sufficient strength to gain control. Otherwise, if they couldn't deal with some formidable monsters in the dimensional space, wishing to occupy the place would just be a pipe dream. Due to that, being able to exterminate the local creatures had become one of thresholds needing to be crossed to prove that one possessed powerful enough manpower. The second condition was that they had to possess sufficient great enough personal strength. Only then could they intimidate and obtain the approval of other human powerhouses while dispelling others from thought of robbing their dimensional space. The third condition was that one also had to possess a certain secret treasure and mystical technique. Otherwise, even if the flux energy was like air on Earth, it couldn't be gathered by large amounts without the proper procedures. Only as long as the above three conditions were accomplished could one produce the flux binding pills. If that wasn't possible, it would be better for the person to remain a consumer. After hearing about the origin of the flux binding pills, Yoon-mu became aware that the relationship between the upper echelons of humanity of the New World was far more complex than he had imagined. But ultimately, it was still in accordance with the core principle followed in the origin world: strength reigns supreme. As long as one's fist was large enough, they could establish their own organization. As long as one's fist was firm enough, they could occupy a dimensional space with a large flux energy output. As long as one's fist was ruthless enough, then even if they didn't have the methods to gather the flux energy, it wouldn't be something to worry about. They could just steal it from others. In short, as long as one was formidable, there wasn't anything that couldn't be obtained in the origin world, including a high position within the strict hierarchy. It's too distant, the flux binding pill is too distant from me. After hearing about the origins of flux binding pill from sea breeze whale, Yoon-mu came to a rational conclusion. After the refining of the power grain had been successful, he had believed that he could also refine flux binding pills, but reality was cruel. In this world, he couldn't move a single step without possessing sufficient strength. The only exception would be if he found an unknown and well-concealed dimensional space which possessed a large amount of flux energy and also didn't have any formidable local creatures. Then he could harvest all of the resources alone, until the secret of his dimensional space was leaked in the world and it was snatched by others. Suddenly, a thought formed in Yoon-mu's mind. He suddenly realized that of the three conditions, he seemed to have fulfilled one of them. He remembered about the king's true territory under his control on Earth. Although the area of the king's true territory couldn't be considered as very large compared to the other dimensional spaces in the origin world, but could that secret region which possessed many king-level dimensional beasts lack in flux energy? In fact, that region was also the place where a deity had perished. Thus, Yoon-mu was quite certain that the king's true territory on Earth was actually a dimensional space with a large amount of flux energy. And that deity which had perished there probably hadn't come from Earth, but the origin world. In a split second, Yoon-mu's understanding expanded. It was highly likely that the deities which appeared in legends had actually crossed over from the origin world. Chapter 379, Secrets of the World. Only this could explain the origins of infant soul preservation which H.A.C.K had cultivated. The creator of that method, Honghua should have been a deity from the origin world. Given all he learned, Yoon-mu was certain that there had been some cultivators from the origin world who had traveled to Earth. As for why it had happened previously, but wasn't happening anymore, it was because the method for crossing the worlds should be extremely difficult. Otherwise there wouldn't be only quasi-deities on Earth without any deity-level powerhouses to be seen. If a deity-level powerhouse existed on Earth, he would be sitting on the clouds like a god. In front of such a person, all the quasi-deities would be just pigs and dogs. What battle sage? They would be just trash. Yoon-mu was extremely nervous in his heart. If all his deductions were correct, then what did it signify? Didn't it mean that there was no longer any method to travel to other planes from the origin world? Wouldn't that also imply that the descenders would have no way to return to Earth? However, if that was really the case, then why would the quasi-deities use all they had to send them over? There is something odd about this, there's no way it's the truth. The quasi-deities should have been certain that we would have a way to return. Otherwise, they wouldn't have needed to find representatives who would follow their plans. Yoon-mu shook his head and didn't ponder about the possibility of traversing between the two planes anymore. Right then, his priority should have been to move forward step by step. When the time came, the answer to the question of whether he could return or not would present itself. The first step mentioned by Battle Sage Vega was to teleport to Blue Moon Island and enter the sect there, becoming its inner disciple. Yoon-mu had already accomplished that step. The second one was to become a genuine core member of Blue Moon sect and advance to Great Flux Expert. As long as he could reach that level, he would have the opportunity to enter the restricted zone in Blue Moon Island. That's right, the second step was precisely to enter Blue Moon Island's restricted zone and search for a specific item according to given coordinates. Yoon-mu was trying hard to accomplish this task. Naturally, he wasn't a fool. Although he was acting like a chess piece by following Battle Sage Vega's plan, he was in another world and had his freedom, and that's why he was working on two tasks at the same time. In other words, while following the steps of the plan, he was also trying his best to raise his strength and become the one who holds the initiative. As long as his strength could reach that of quasi-deities, he could appear on the chessboard as a player rather than a pawn. This was Yoon-mu's intention, and he was planning to make it real. This was also the reason why he had learned the method to refine Croton and nurtured the group of ape gods. Only by doing would he be completely prepared when the day to return to Earth came. At that moment, the sea breeze whale interrupted Yoon-mu's contemplation. All right, speak of the second matter. I have told you everything related to flux binding pills. If it is something that I know about, I will magnanimously inform you about it too. Yoon-mu was in a dilemma regarding the choice of his second question. He was faced with two options. First was to ask whether there was something similar to space elements in this world, while the second was to gain more information about the dimensional spaces and how to discover them. According to Sea Breeze Whale's recent explanation, there existed countless dimensional spaces in the origin world, but ordinary cultivators had no method to discover their existence. It required a special method, only with it could they be found. In short, whether Yoon-mu possessed the special method or not would determine how he viewed the origin world. If he didn't possess that special method, he would only see the boundless origin world, which was very large and almost inexhaustible, possessing all sorts of life forms. This was the general opinion of the ordinary people regarding the origin world. However, if he came to be in possession of that special method, his thinking would become completely different. In the future, he could discover countless dimensional spaces which were present everywhere. Regarding this point, he didn't mind it before, since he didn't know about their existence. But once he learned about them, he felt like a blind person who had just found out that the world consisted of more colors than just one. He was finding it quite difficult to endure and was unable to accept his helpless situation. It was similar to the feeling that there was always someone watching his back. Space elements were important and were an urgent requirement, but in the end he decided after a slight hesitation that he shouldn't lose such an opportunity. If he lost it, it may not come again, so he had to grab it and get a clear understanding of that special method so that he could discover the secret of the dimensional spaces. Otherwise, the feeling that there was someone by his side and could see his secret would drive him mad. He couldn't endure the feeling of being unable to conceal anything. He thought for a moment. Before the second question, can I ask an insignificant question? The sea breeze whale pondered over it, but in the end still agreed. Insignificant question? All right, seeing that you have adapted to the circumstances quickly, this grand sea breeze whale will answer your insignificant question. Li Yoon-mu suddenly thought of a crucial point about the second step which he needed to implement. Reportedly Blue Moon sect possesses a restricted zone. Is it a dimensional space or not? Haha, I was thinking about what question you might have. This is indeed an insignificant question, so I can answer you easily. The sea breeze whale laughed heartily. After all, for someone like it who had lived for thousands of years, a trifling administrative power like Blue Moon sect wasn't worthy of entering its eyes. Not to mention that Li Yoon-mu's question was only about the restricted zone. I can answer you. Blue Moon Island's restricted zone is both a dimensional space and not. The sea breeze whale flaunted its knowledge. What does that mean? Great sire, please don't ridicule this weak human cultivator. I have always worked diligently to become more powerful and will continue to do so, because I want to survive. Li Yoon-mu forced a bitter smile. Good line. Good, good, I admit that you human have moved me. You are still weak, but as long as you possesses a determined heart, everything will improve. I will also give you a little assistance. Chapter 380, Sea Breeze Whales Present. This is a deep ocean pearl containing some of my presents. If you hold it on the western edge of Blue Moon Island, you can form a pact with the giant beasts of the races under my protection and make one of them your mount. But remember, this has a deadline. The mount will only serve you for 1 year. It can also be considered as an offbeat reciprocation for not disturbing me for the next year, the sea breeze whale said after a moment of silence. Its words excited Li Yoon-mu. He hadn't expected that an unintentional line said by him would surprisingly be able to trigger the empathy of the sea breeze whale. Was this the mercy of a powerful towards the weak? Or had it been moved by his insignificance and hard work? Regardless of what was the case, it was an enormous benefit for Li Yoon-mu. He was unwilling to miss on such an opportunity and hastily took the indigo-colored ocean pearl that was spit out from the enormous mouth of the sea breeze whale. The indigo-colored ocean pearl was the size of a fist and appeared to be a pearl nurtured in the body of an enormous clam, which was why the sea breeze whale called it the deep ocean pearl. Since came from an enormous clam in the deep ocean layer, it should signify great fortune. Li Yoon-mu was ecstatic and hurriedly expressed his thanks. In his heart, though, he was wildly shouting, "What a great man, what a thick thigh to hold!" Any move made by the ancient desolate beast from the deep ocean layer was naturally extraordinary. After that, Li Yoon-mu finally heard about the restricted zone of Blue Moon sect. It was indeed as he had guessed, just another dimensional space. If he hadn't known about the real situation of the origin world, then in the future, even if Li Yoon-mu used all sorts of methods, he still wouldn't have been able to find out that the restricted zone of Blue Moon sect wasn't on an actual piece of land but was a dimensional space. That would have been quite the bad luck. Blue Moon sect's restricted zone was on the mountain range at the rear side of the sect, with 2 elders standing guard over it throughout the year. But even if he would have had the ability to sneak into the restricted zone, he wouldn't have been able to find the real thing without using the right procedures. After all, the restricted zone behind the mountain was only a facade. The true restricted zone was actually established in a dimensional space over there. If Li Yoon-mu hadn't heard about all that from the sea breeze whale, he probably would have taken a great detour. At that moment, he realized that learning about dimensional spaces was definitely far more important than about space elements. Thus, Li Yoon-mu asked about the method to clearly see the existence of dimensional space without any hesitation. The reply of the sea breeze whale was quite simple, just a single sentence: space world trees leaf juice. As long as Li Yoon-mu could smear the leaf juice of Space World Tree on his eyes, the whole world before him would become completely different. What exactly is this Space World Tree though? He was completely ignorant about it. But as long as he knew about this special method, he would have a chance. Unexpectedly, summoning the sea breeze whale had gotten him a great harvest, which was completely out of his expectations. It seemed that a mistake had turned out to be a lucky stroke for him. Sea breeze whale's speed in the ocean was terrifying. It was said that the number of races which could surpass it in speed could be counted on one hand. From that, it could be seen that apart from being extremely formidable, sea breeze whales had the right to be arrogant in the ocean due to another matter as well. Normally, it take 10 days to reach Cloud Island from Blue Moon Island using a cruise ship. But because Li Yoon-mu was sitting on the sea breeze whale, he did it in 7 hours, reaching the meeting point far earlier than Zhengchuan's group. Good. Human, I hope I will see you again. You can become a human powerhouse in the future. The sea breeze whale let Li Yoon-mu off near the coast and then returned to the ocean depths with ease. Li Yoon-mu suddenly thought of something and loudly yelled while facing toward the sea, "Admirable sire, I thank your noble self for assisting me. Can I know your name?" Li Yoon-mu didn't wish to miss out on the slightest chance and tried his best to hold on to the thick thigh. However, when sea breeze whale's voice echoed in his brain, it didn't bring the reply for which he was hoping. "Wait until you have become a sage flux expert. When that time comes, you will learn my name." The voice got smaller and smaller as the sentence got near its end. Li Yoon-mu wasn't dejected and quickly swam to the shore. Only then did he discover that the Cloud Island where he had agreed to meet Zhengchuan was actually extremely small. The small island couldn't even compare to Azure Dragon Island. It was no wonder then that it didn't even have a transfer channel. But that was already asking a lot. There actually wasn't even a town present at the center of the island. This territory of Blue Moon Island didn't even have any administrators. When Li Yoon-mu walked about the island, he discovered that its area wasn't too small. It was comparable to 50 football stadiums. But in the origin world, an island of this level couldn't even enter the eyes of a third-rate sect like Blue Moon Island. There simply was too much land in this world. He walked around the island for a long time before finally discovering some trails of human habitat. Following them, Li Yoon-mu found a small settlement which had around 10 or so houses. With such size, it probably couldn't even be considered as a small fisherman village. Li Yoon-mu knew that the residents of the island belonged to the servant and civilian class. They could be slaves who had fled their workplace or perhaps ordinary people who were extremely poor. Sure enough, when they saw Li Yoon-mu wearing exorbitant clothing and possessing the traits of nobles, they were panic-stricken. Regardless of the camp's size, even the children were terrified. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I don't have any evil intentions. I only want to stay here for a while. Here is some food to show my gratitude." Li Yoon-mu expressed his kind intentions straight away. He then took out few large sacks of flour, rice, meat as well as some of the other essentials which the people there could never access. The able-bodied people of the settlement had probably gone to the ocean to catch food, so there were only a few small children and women as well as elderly knitting near the houses. They were all very poor, extremely poor. They also didn't have the ability to go out to the sea and were even unable to go to the nearest fisherman village. Because of their poverty, they didn't even have the materials to build a boat just to go to the nearest coast. After all, given the stormy seas of North Blue, one couldn't sail a boat unless it was at least 10 meters in length. Otherwise, it would definitely topple. Without any miracle, the people before Li Yoon-mu would keep living in their impoverished circumstances generation after generation without, unable to turn around their lives. Thus, Li Yoon-mu providing them with food and essentials was the best way for him to show his goodwill.